This tutorial introduces you to the major components of the RapidMiner software user interface and the general process of using the software for data mining. If you remember this basic architecture, it will help you use the software for a specific data mining problem setting. So let's take a specific problem setting to introduce the software. So here's the situation, the problem setting. This is an underwater mine detection setting. So you have an unknown object, and for simplicity, we are saying it's either a mine or a rock. So some sonar device on the ship sends out a ping. There is a reflected signal from the unknown object, and there are electronics on the ship that measure 60 different parameters of this reflected signal. And these 60 measurements, so 60 features of the reflected signal, as it were, are then fed into some algorithm. And then the algorithm tells you, based on its analysis of those 60 parameters, that whether it's a mine or a rock. It will not be right all the time, of course, but you hope it's right most of the time. So obviously, in order to do this, the algorithm has to be trained. So the analogy I would use is you give a picture to a child and say, is it a horse or is it a cat? Okay, and in order for the child to answer that question, the child has to be trained. And the way you train the child is by showing it lots of pictures of actual horses and cats. So you show a picture to the child and you say, this is a horse. And you show another picture and say, this is a cat. And you do that many different times. And what the child learns to do is associate features of the horse with the label horse and features of the cat with the label cat. So that's what's going on here. So in order to train this algorithm, we have a data set of known underwater objects. So the labels are known. And for each of these known objects, we have the 60 measurements. And the training process is to get the algorithm to associate these features with the labels. So that's basically the activity that's going on. And the purpose of this tutorial, of course, is not to understand the algorithm, but to see general features of the software, how that would be used to actually train this algorithm, set it up for data mining. Okay, so let's start up the software and see how one would use it. When you first open up RapidMiner, this is the picture that you should see. If it doesn't look like this, then just click on View and click on Restore Default View. So this is the default view. Once you become an expert or get more experience with RapidMiner, you can move these components around, but the default view is a good place to start. So what are the components of this user interface? The most visible one, of course, is the component in the middle, which, as you can see, is called process. And it's good to remember that term process, because operationally, when you use RapidMiner, what you will be doing is designing processes. You will be designing processes and running them. Where you run a process is by clicking on this arrow button. So you create processes and run them. And what is a process? A process is simply a collection of operators that are connected together in some form. So it's not just a haphazard collection of processes. It's a collection of operators. So let's see, for our specific example, we will use this underwater mine detection example as we move along. But what are some of the other components of the user interface that you see? In the northwest corner here, you can see this component called repository. And as you might imagine, this panel over here is associated with getting your data in for data mining. Obviously, you need to collect your raw data before you can do the mining. So this panel over here has all the bits and pieces that you need to get your raw data in for processing. Okay. And then this panel on the southwest side, which you see operators, are contain the pieces that you use to work with the data, to transform the data, to actually do the analysis. Okay, so you can see there's modeling, there's blending, there's cleansing, there's scoring. So there are different types of operators that one can use. That's not the objective here. That just to see that the main panel over here is operators. So you have process, you have repository, and you have operators. Okay. Now, in the northeast corner, you see this other panel, which is called parameters, and the parameters set up conditions that apply to the process that you're looking at. Just to give you one example, it says log verbosity. Anytime you run a process, some kind of log is generated. So this log verbosity basically sets up how much detail do you want in the log. Okay, so as you set up operators inside the process, this panel over here in the northeast corner will allow you to set conditions that apply to that particular operator. Okay. Now, the last panel that you see is in the southeast corner, and this is your context sensitive help. So, depending on what it is that you're doing, various help information will show up in this panel, and you can make use of it as and when you need to. So again, in summary, in terms of the basic components, the main component that you'll be working with is this in the user interface is this component called a process. So in RapidMiner, remember, you basically create processes and you run them. So let's go back to our mine detection example and see how it will work. Remember, we were trying to train this algorithm. So as it so happens, the training data for this mine algorithm, that mine problem setting, is already there in the sample data set. So in this left-hand panel called the repository, I click on data, and you can see that one of the data sets in here is sonar. Okay, so what I do is I drag this data set in here to processes. Now see what has happened. You have this box which says retrieve sonar. So I've set up an operator. Remember, we said a process is a collection of operators that are connected together in some form. So here's my first operator, retrieve sonar. So I actually haven't gotten the data called sonar. That will only happen once I run this process. Okay. So I've just retrieved this, set up this operator called retrieve sonar. And in order to actually see the output once it is run, I connect this output port to results. Okay, so here's another term that I've just introduced for you, ports. You have input ports. All operators have input ports and output ports. So I have a very basic process here consisting of one operator, which is retrieve sonar, and it's connected, the output port is connected to results. Okay, if I actually want to see the results of this process, I would need to run it. So here is that activity. I actually run the process, and you can see that immediately in this tab you have moved over from design to results, because this is the output of actually running that operator. And you can see that you have these different observations. These are like showing the child a horse and a cat. So you're showing the algorithm a rock, and here are the 60 measurements, attribute 1 through, if you scroll over to the right, you can see attribute 60. Those are the 60 measurements of the reflected signal for this first example, rock. Okay, so you have, if I remember correctly, there were 97 examples of rocks and 111 of mines. Okay, so this is the raw data. If you want to see some basic statistics about the raw data, I just click on that button called statistics, and you get some summary value. So again, we don't need to get into the details of these numbers, but I've just shown you two basic steps in using this software, that is setting up the process and then running it. You set up a process and you run it. And now this is a very basic process, of course, so which is retrieve sonar, and I see the output of it, namely the dataset sonar, only when I run the process. Okay, so obviously I haven't actually trained anything yet. We just took a look at the operator sonar. So now I want to use this to train the algorithm, and there are many different classification algorithms. So here's what I'm going to do. From this panel on the southeast corner called operators, I'm going to pick up one of the modeling operators. Okay, so here's neural nets. Okay, so I'm going to pick up a neural net operator. So this is the model actually. Okay, so here I've dropped the operator into this process panel. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the raw data and connect it to the input port of this operator called neural net. So now do you see that I have a process that consists of two operators. One is retrieve sonar and the other is neural net itself. And I have connected the output port of one operator to the input port of the second. So this is basically how you set up the process. You have operators and you connect output to input ports and you string them along, and you get, after everything is said and done, you'll get a picture in this middle panel called the process, and then you would run it. Okay, so now, so I've connected the operator retrieve sonar, the output port of it, to the input port of neural net. Now you can see that the operator called neural net is still red, meaning that you haven't completed working with it. The system is trying to tell you that you haven't completed working with it. So now I take the output of this model and I connect it to results. Okay, so now again I have a process, this time a slightly more involved process. So I have two operators, one is retrieve sonar and the second one is neural net. And what I have done is connected the output port of one operator to the input port of another, and then the output port of neural net, that model, to results. Okay, so now I can run this process, and the running of this process will train the neural net. Okay, so let's run this process. Now notice that as I'm all the while as I'm creating the process, this tab over here stays with design because I'm designing the process. Okay. Now as soon as I run this process, I will get the results. Okay. So let's run it. So now it's the training has been done, and you have this neural network. And again, you don't need to know about neural network. That's not the objective of this particular tutorial. All that you can see over here is that the training is complete and the results of running the process are being shown over here. So if you already know something about neural networks, you can see that you have these input features. You have 60 different measurements, right? So on the input side, you have 60 different measurements, and from it you're supposed to decide whether it's a mine or a rock. Okay, and this middle column that you see is what's called a hidden layer in neural network. Again, we don't need to get into the details of what a neural network is. That there will be other tutorials on it, but here all you're seeing is the results of running the process. Okay, so let's get back to design. So this is the process itself. Once you run the process, here are the results. Okay, so for our purposes here, this tutorial has shown you the broad steps involved in working with RapidMiner. So from the initial screen, you basically set up a process, and then the process consists of operators that are connected together in some form, and then you run the process. Obviously, the process can be pretty involved depending on how many operators you have and what's the complexity of their connections. Now, notice that if I click on neural network here, you see that the northeast panel, the parameter panel, has changed to give you options that are specific to that operator. So you can set up parameters here that will apply to this particular operation. Okay. Now, if I go back to the top level, which is the process, then the parameters that you see here are the parameters that apply to the overall root process that covers all the operators together. Okay, so it's context sensitive. I hope this little tutorial has given you some idea of what the general user interface, what are the general components of the user interface. There are five major components, five panels or five components of the user interface. The main one being the process panel, and then these other ones, the northwest corner is repository that is associated with getting the data in for doing the mining. The southeast corner, which actually contains the models that you would like to train, called the operators. And then in the northeast corner, you have parameters that customize the operators or the process in some way. And then the southeast corner, the southeast corner, which has context sensitive help. So this is overall an overview of the RapidMiner software, just basic, its basic architecture, and this is the architecture that would apply to any specific data mining problem that you're applying the software.